Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flotat from mxdwn.com. That's Mixdown. So glad to see you well. We've got stories on a whole bunch of different stuff and a little story about failure. No, not the band, though they're a wonderful band, but the concept of failure or the act of failure. We're going to start right away with something that is super interesting, I think, in terms of what's happening in the industry at large. And it has to do with the most consumable product as far as the world of music is concerned. Now, a lot of us have been used to for a long time compact discs being the primary vehicle of how music was consumed. And then in the last 15 years, that kind of shifted to downloads. And then more recently, of course, streaming, Spotify, and the various other platforms that make it possible have come to dominate exactly the way that everybody engages with music. Now, in the time before, generations past, our parents and their parents before, for a very, very long time, vinyl or records, as they're known, was the key platform that everybody basically bought and consumed. Now, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it wasn't super common that people bought full length albums. Maybe they bought singles, or maybe they bought collections of singles, or maybe they bought EPs that would be 4 or 5 songs. And then, of course, as the 60s and 70s came into play, full-length vinyl LPs became commonplace, and then eventually that dominated the whole concept of the industry. The idea of a band having an album became the predominant way of doing things. That shifted into 8 tracks a little, that shifted into cassette tapes somewhat in the 80s, and then somewhere around the late 80s is where the compact disc, which was essentially a piece of plastic with ones and zeros encoded on it, that essentially a laser would read the ones and zeros and then, communicate it back to your stereo as audio, became the dominant form of music. And for quite a while there, cassettes and vinyl records kind of started to go the way of the dodo. Little by little, there started being less and less and less vinyl as far as what people were using and consuming. Now, the important thing to understand is that compact discs were, an approximation digitally of what sound is. And at some level, there's only so finite that a digital signal can be in terms of capturing the overtone series and how a sine wave ultimately is as far as what you perceive as sound. But records were always regarded as a little bit more pure in that respect because of the deep groove in the record, the way the needle goes across the wax cylinder, and ultimately is, for the closest approximation you can, more or less approximating the real human deep sound of sound. And for a long time, some people were purists and stuck with vinyl in spite of the fact that compact discs had come to dominate basically everything. Now, what happened, and what's interesting, as of course downloads became a big thing, and the piracy generation and the Napster generation, and then more recently streaming basically took over. You could go to CD stores or used CD stores or used record stores, and you're going to find that almost nobody is even willing to buy or take compact discs anymore. There were some places that I went recently looking to offload some old compact discs that I didn't look to have, and the person who ran the store up in the valley here in Los Angeles basically indicated that people literally come every single morning and drop off several boxes full of hundreds or if not thousands of compact discs just to be thrown away. They don't even try to sell them. And it's become a point where most stores that are out there, they can't give CDs away. People don't really want to buy them unless there's some kind of special rarity or something really important. So what's significant, what's interesting is the RIAA, as otherwise known as the Recording Industry Association of America, which is kind of the lobbyist arm of the music biz, as it were. Some of you who are a little older might remember in the piracy generation, it was the RIAA that was the organization that was fighting against Napster and Grokster and Morpheus and Kazaa and all these other platforms. But the RIAA, on behalf of the music biz, and how accurate this is up to your own interpretation, but is effectively reporting that for the first time in 2022 since 1987, vinyl records, the sale of them has eclipsed the sale of the compact disc. This is crazy to think about after all this time, especially since so many people so avidly kind of just use streaming services. People don't really want to own media anymore the way that it used to matter to have something you could put in a player and hear in your own stereo. Now, in 2022, vinyl sold 41 million units, which was a 17% increase over the year before, and compact discs only amounted for 33 million units. Some might seem silly at the end of the day. What is one platform versus another? Does anybody weep for the 8-track? Don't know. But it was kind of an immense thing to think about that for decades, every single little thing about the music business was tailored around the concept that you had to engage and you had to absorb compact discs. Buy these pieces of plastic. They're so important. Look at the art. Look at what we've done with the art. Look at the liner notes. Look what we do with the liner notes. And now you can't give them away. And now it's starting to become this very old technology that's been around for a long, long, long time, and effectively is in its such a resurgence that it's starting to become a thing that effectively drives the way that music releases are being thought about now in terms of a physical product. So, as a tiny footnote, the top 5 selling vinyl records, in case you were curious, were in 2022 Taylor Swift's Midnights, Harry Styles' Harry's House, Olivia Rodrigo's Sour, not much of a surprise there, Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City, which is interesting considering he's got so many wonderful records, but Good Kid, Mad City still holding up very strong. And then lastly, but not leastly, Fleetwood Mac's Rumors. Even after all these decades and everyone in the world has it, apparently big rush on people wanting to own Fleetwood Mac on vinyl. Who would have thunk it? In more insidious news, Tennessee is following a list of conservative-led, at least politically speaking, states that have enacted a new law that is aimed at, well, we'll let the law speak for itself. Effectively, kind of following suit with what Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida, where he is basically galvanizing his entire political agenda on what he thinks is combating wokeness and combating, I don't know, teaching white kids that maybe there might be something bad about them, or perhaps presenting the opportunity to children that there were other kinds of sexual orientations other than being straight. Effectively, more and more conservative states are starting to follow suit. Ron DeSantis has done so many things that essentially he's, caused himself to be in a giant dogfight with Disney World, which is, of course, one of the largest sources of jobs in the state of Florida. But effectively, Tennessee has a new law that is an expansion of an existing law, and I'm going to read it for you. It's being referred to as a drag ban law by a lot of people out there in the world, and it's Senate Bill 3, which amends Tennessee Code Annotated Title 7, Chapter 51, Part 14, relative to adult-oriented performances. And it says, adult cabaret performance means a performance in a location other than adult cabaret that features topless dancers, go-go dancers, exotic dancers, strippers, male or female impersonators who provide entertainment that appeals to a prurient interest, or similar entertainers, regardless of whether or not performed for consideration. Excuse me. Effectively, this law is ostensibly saying that anything that could be constituted as a drag performance in any way is basically now against the law in Tennessee. You can't do this, and especially where it pertains to being either done in public or in the view of children. Now, in terms of similar entertainers, like who's going to be the one making the designation? Like, what point does wore a dress as a part of a comedy act? Is that a drag show now? Does that mean that that's inappropriate for any children or families to be around? Is that illegal in that respect? Understandably so, in a modern era where LGBTQ representation is a huge deal, and of course it represents an ever-growing part of the population. It's, well, and to be 100% fair, probably always was a part of the population in that measure. It just wasn't considered okay until now it's really becoming as okay as it should have always been. But effectively, people who care about those matters are incensed, right? They're enraged. This is terrible. This is a horrible, bizarre, and strange thing. And, interesting to note, this same statute indicates a first offense for a violation of subdivision C1 is a Class A misdemeanor, and a second or subsequent such offense is a Class E felony. So you could potentially see prison time behind doing a drag show, a drag performance, a cabaret performance in Tennessee. So in response, a group that has basically put together a series of different performers, and it's being, presented in Tennessee on March 20th, called Love Rising. And it features a bevy of very impressive people, not the least of which to be included Amanda Shires, Brittany Howard, Hayley Williams, Hosier, Julian Baker, Maren Morris, Sheryl Crow, and more. All happening on March 20th, and all of the proceeds going to charity. And the charities that they're benefiting are Tennessee Equality Project, Inclusion Tennessee, Out Memphis, and the Tennessee Pride Chapter in partnership with the Looking Out Foundation. So essentially, this event is aimed at being something of a protest of this law and what it stands for, and trying to raise money to help the people that might most directly be affected by it. And, not the least of which, I would call this, and we've talked about this internally here at Mixdown quite a bit, this is probably the beginning of what's going to become a much larger issue. I think you're going to hear a lot more about this in the weeks to come, especially as more states starts to enact more draconian and insane things that are kind of out of step with what a large section of the populace who's perfectly peaceful, law abiding, and tax paying believes in, likes, wants, thinks is okay. And, you're going to feel a lot of friction coming from this. And, at least in the world of entertainment, last week, the first shot off the bow came in the form of the Bonnaroo Music Festival, which is, of course, in Tennessee. And it's like one of the biggest festivals in America. I mean, and some years drew more of a crowd than even Coachella, some years. And effectively, Bonnaroo basically issued a statement without saying anything too overt, because there's a lot of musicians and a lot of modern artists, a lot of pop artists that are going to be at this festival, and of course many of them in favor of LGBTQ rights and standing, or perhaps they are themselves. And effectively, Bonnaroo issued a statement on social media. It said, Bonnaroo has and always will be a place for inclusivity, a safe haven for people of all walks of life, and a champion of self-expression. Rest assured, the farm will remain a sanctuary for those freedoms, and Bonnaroovians will see no changes in programming or celebration of self-expression at the festival. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to call that like picking a fight with Tennessee and its law enforcement arm and its political arm and its governor. I wouldn't go so far as to call that out and out picking a fight, but it is an outward statement of defiance. And I mean, the question, what will be really interesting is, what is Tennessee going to do if someone runs afoul of this law? What are the punishments really going to look like? What are they really, or would they storm a festival like Bonnaroo with 100,000 people, and somebody is doing something that could be in someone's eyes regarded as a drag show? I mean, that could mean damn near anything out there in the world. Would they just arrest them and haul them off stage? There's going to be some gnarly stuff to come behind this, and of course, this is the kind of thing that has become kind of the lightning rod for alt-right conservatives and super right-leaning conservatives in America right now, is betting on what they perceive to be their base of their voter bloc, that what they want to hear is that they're standing up against what they perceive as, wokeness, be it that they're directly attacking what wokeness really is, or that they just what they believe wokeness to be. So this is not going to be the end. This is merely the beginning, and things will probably get hairy as they go. We'll keep you apprised as more details and more things transpire. Elsewhere, in sillier news and the world of video games, we talked a little bit on one of the earlier shows, and This Week is Live, about the game Hearthstone, which is made by Blizzard Entertainment and is kind of a digital version of a collectible card game. And it's a pretty good game, and there's constantly new sets and new cards. Ostensibly, you collect cards and you make a deck, and then you play against other people of the deck, and the randomness of the deck drawing is ostensibly what makes the game interesting or fun. This is a lot along the lines of Magic the Gathering, which started in the 90s, which was a physical card game where you buy in, packs and different cards and rearrange and make decks to your heart's content and then play against other people, and the randomness of the game was what was fun about it. Well, not to be outdone, of course, Hearthstone being a massive success in the internet and having esports tournaments and prize pools and national and world championships, all kinds of crap like that. Not to be outdone, then now there is also many numerous people trying to get in the arena of digital card games, collectible card games, and probably the most successful of them is a relative newcomer to the scene, which is called Marvel Snap. Marvel Snap is essentially another formulation of a collectible card game. Instead of really buying packs and getting random cards, you just play to get cards, and then you just make your deck directly, and each new thing you get is just one new card for it. But of course, the key in this is that every card in the game isn't some new fantasy property or some new science fiction, or it's literally the entire, canon of the Marvel Studios, Marvel comic books universe of heroes. Regardless of what movies are possible and what studios own the rights to what movies, it's literally every villain and hero within what Marvel Comics has ever created, which is, a lot, even if you're not a comic book fan. And what's interesting is in just about over a year, the game has already been downloaded about 18 million times and has amassed about 50 million in global revenue. Remember, revenue does not necessarily equal gross profit, but still fascinating to think that even just after a year's time, they've taken that big of a bite out of the market. Probably doesn't hurt that, of course, that they have Marvel characters to work with, and people love things like Spider-Man and the X-Men and stuff like that, and the affinity for that, and of course, Captain America and Iron Man, the Avengers movies, and everything that's been such a big part of the popular culture zeitgeist in the recent years. Effectively, massive success for something that's, ostensibly really a mobile game for phones. And I mean, mobile games in the world of video games is always still kind of regarded as not being cool enough. And you get to know a lot of serious video gamers. What happens is there's an insular notion of what is appropriate. They want big graphics, they want big budgets, they want really elaborate things, they want really cool things. And there's always a lot of people looking down their nose at, mobile games. And most of the populace doesn't have video game consoles or PCs that are jacked up for high quality graphics, but everyone has a mobile phone. So that means in some ways the biggest pocket of playing and usage for video games tends to be mobile games. So it's a bizarre kind of weird thing. Like, mobile games are treated as if they're not as important as anything else because they're not some giant first person shooter. I don't know, I've never understood that myself. And another pocket of really strange and hard to attribute news. Apparently, there are reports coming out of Deadline and The Hollywood Reporter in Europe, specifically in France and in Germany, where the movie Creed 3 is having several incidents where people are getting into fights before, during, or after the screening, causing screenings to be canceled. Now, there was one viral video that came out about a week ago that showed a couple people getting in a fight at a screening opening weekend. But since, apparently, in Saint Etienne, and then, forgive me, any French-speaking viewers of this show, if I pronounce this wrong, Thionville and Dreux. And in Germany, in Bremen, Hamburg, and Essen, basically, effectively, various incidents unrelated of people getting in fights and cops having to come and the theaters being canceled. And some theaters going so far as to pull out of playing Creed 3, period. Now, for those of you that aren't much on the way of movies, Creed ostensibly has become an extension of the original Sylvester Stallone Rocky film franchise and effectively follows, the erstwhile son of Apollo Creed, one of his opponents, which is played by Michael B. Jordan. And this one, he faces off against, a character played by Jonathan Majors. We've spoken a lot about Jonathan Majors because of his role as Kang the Conqueror and now in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And effectively, what one has to do with the other, except for the fact that it's a movie about boxing, I honestly can't tell you. Like, why is it that fights are happening here? Does this have anything to do with the content of the movie? Probably not. But what is it about this particular thing that has it happening? Or is this some kind of bizarre copycat thing where now that the word's been out that there's been some kind of an altercation and a Creed 3 showing that people are showing up just to rabble rouse and cause trouble? Is it some kind of stupid viral challenge? Because there are plenty of stupid viral challenges out there. Who knows? That part of it I can't really say, and I don't think anyone else can really either. But it also could be, and I'm just theorizing here, and anything that I can use to back up or support this, but it could be the general frustration of the worldwide populace, which is evident in damn near everything that we engage with at this point. Life's more difficult, life's more expensive, inflation is out of control, people are exhausted, people are sick. There are a lot of long-term health consequences, both because of COVID and also because of being isolated because of COVID. There's a lot of unhappy people out there. Could it just be that frustration boiling over? Who knows? And then lastly, as far as entertainment headlines is concerned, and what I would consider a very happy piece of news, and anyone who's a dork for superhero content will probably feel the same, Marvel Studios has allowed it to slip. I mean, nothing comes out of what Disney and Marvel are doing that they don't want to have come out. There's not much in the way of real scoops that'll happen in that arena. But effectively, Marvel Studios is allowed to come out that Jon Bernthal is going to be reprising his role as Frank Castle, otherwise known as the Punisher, America's favorite, very, very dark, gun-toting vigilante from the comic books that has been equal thorn in the side of Spider-Man, Daredevil, and other characters throughout many, many decades of Marvel Comics lore, and is of some people a bit of a hero for being a person who stands up and, does what is necessary, and others is kind of a symbol of, murder and being a vigilante, just going nuts and going on a rampage. But effectively, for whatever the case may be, and whatever you think about vigilantes, Jon Bernthal's performance as the Punisher is pretty much the defining presentation of the character. Kind of like Heath Ledger as the Joker. You're not going to really see anything as good as what Jon Bernthal does with this character. Now, he showed up in the second season of Daredevil on Netflix when there was the limited continuity of the Defenders characters in Netflix. And effectively, he was, a big part of that story in the second season. And then the character was so successful, they had him have his own spin-off show. And there were 2 seasons of The Punisher. And, first season was pretty good. Second season was pretty good. Didn't really end very strong, but was still very good in general as the season went on. So Jon Bernthal is going to be returning to that character and returning to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this time not in the pocket like Defenders portion of the universe, but in the larger MCU continuity and is going to be a part of the show that has been advertised for a while, which has Charlie Cox returning to the role of Daredevil, which is called Daredevil Born Again, which is apparently going to be the longest show that's come out on Disney Plus. Is going to be something like 18 episodes, and it will also feature Vincent D'Onofrio. As a tiny side note for big fans of Daredevil, there was a long-running campaign by there was a lot of fans of the Daredevil Netflix show, and there was this whole Save Daredevil kind of movement where they were trying very hard to campaign that the show should never be terminated and it shouldn't have been canceled by Netflix as a part of their deal falling apart with Marvel. But Deborah Ann Wool, who played Karen Page in the original show, and Elvin Henson, who played Foggy Nelson, who is, Matt Murdock's best friend and partner through their law firm and everything. Right now, it doesn't look like they're involved. No one's really said anything for sure, but at least as far as sources at the Deadline and Hollywood Reporter indicate, probably they're not going to be a part of the show, which would be a massive disappointment to fans of the show because they were wonderful in their respective parts. So, lastly, before we finish off here today, I wanted to take time today to tell a little story and just talk about failure. Once again, like I joked at the beginning of the show, not the band Failure, though they're wonderful and you should hear their albums if you have a chance, but just generally the concept of failure. Now, where I grew up and when I grew up, there was a lot of talk and a lot of thinking about, some degree of excellence. And there was a notion of trying to avoid making mistakes. Now, maybe that was part of my family. Maybe that was part of the community where I was raised. It's hard to say where that couches in overarching American values. I was young. But there was this general notion in a lot of my upbringing that you should try with whatever ability that you can to not make mistakes and to not fail. And, it's been a lot of years since that time, and I've done a lot of things in my life since that time. And one of the things that's always been kind of a hard-fought lesson, coming from a mentality of make everything perfect, make it all work well, make it all be exactly what it needs to be, is that failure is ultimately kind of inevitable and probably the most helpful piece of what allows a person to grow. And, if you want to take it metaphorically, it allows an entity to grow, whether it's a business or a company or a brand or a band or an arts collective. A lot of the time, the things that don't go well are ultimately the most instructive lessons and are ultimately the things that most help in terms of growth. I like to think back when I was in college and I was going to a college called University of the Arts, and I majored in a major that was brand new at the time called multimedia. And, it was one of those things where we went into college and everyone was being told you're going to make so much money and you're going to go on to an easy career. And then by the time we graduated, the dot-com bubble had burst and everyone was like, good luck finding a job. Good luck finding any kind of job. So, of course, right around that time, I started looking for work. I started thinking about school ending and what was I going to do with this, and started applying to jobs, just trying to get my foot in the door, just to try to start. And, I'd already learned some programming and I'd already learned how to do some programming languages, which wasn't even a thing that my major really taught you that much. But, I just kind of take it upon myself to do it. And I'll never forget that I thought I was being clever. And, ostensibly in those days, it was like if you were a tech company, well, of course you were applying via email. There wasn't LinkedIn. There wasn't, like form submission things. You would find an email address and you'd follow the instructions and you'd email in your resume and your cover letter in that old style fashion, just, digitally as a Word doc or as a PDF. And I thought it'd be clever, and I try to make everything really neat, and I try to basically set it up as an email that was all fully designed and, basically wasn't just, an attachment in an email. Like I was sending everything in line in the body of the email. Now that's its whole own ball of wax in this day and age, but in those days it was seemingly easy to basically be able to construct something with HTML, to use HTML programming to try to make something look kind of neat and cool. And, I did it. And most of the places that I sent my resume to, it came through and it looked like a resume. It looked like designed and tailored, like bulleted information that speak to qualifications and programming languages and stuff like that, and what I was trying to get it for a job at that phase of my life. But then there was a couple companies where I guess I didn't anticipate that maybe their email clients wouldn't understand HTML email. Now, it's pretty common nowadays. I mean, the average thing you get from Target or Walmart or Facebook or eBay comes in, and it's a tailored designed email. That's all HTML code underneath all of that. That's all HTML code beneath that. But effectively, when it came time for this particular thing and these people, they were still using some old version of Microsoft Outlook. And effectively what came through was just a ton of code, So I'll never forget that one of the, companies that I had applied to at that point literally responded and said, Raymond, your email is unintelligible. Needless to say that nothing went any further than that, even though I cleaned it up and sent them a better version of the resume and the cover letter. It didn't matter. The damage was done at that point. And that stung in a real way, especially because I was trying to do something better than normal. I was reaching for something special. I was trying to be like, how do I differentiate myself? I had to take a chance and do something special. And, it stung to think that not only did it not work, but that they were kind of caustic and rude about it. And, it permanently put me in the jackpot. And that's the kind of thing where they say, there's a portion of your brain, and I like to call it the difference between your brain and your mind, right? There is effectively what your brain is, your automatics part of yourself. And then there's your mind, which is you, your consciousness, your choices, your experiences, the things that have happened to you. Your brain learns eventually like, oh God, don't do something that hurts us. It's like, putting your hand by an open flame. Ow, that'll hurt. I shouldn't do that. My brain will remind me this will be bad for us if we do this. So it's the kind of thing that your brain tries to teach you not to do. Okay, this is how you can avoid feeling terrible, right? And so this becomes the kind of thing where you take an action like that and now it's permanently etched in your brain. Oh God, I don't want to feel that way again. I don't want to be rejected in such a powerful way again. I don't want to feel embarrassed in that way again. So effectively, this kind of becomes the kind of thing that's on some level it's instructive. And, hey, look, I never made that mistake again. And, basically expect that you can't depend on the interoperability of other people's technology. So the simple answer is you make sure that you kind of funnel what you're doing in a way that anyone could see the information you're trying to provide them. And of course, thankfully, computers and technology, PDFs are an easy thing nowadays. So making a PDF and having that be a universal way of people being able to digest that information, cool. If you're ever applying for a job, that's an easy thing to do. But it was still a powerful lesson. And at the same time, as much as it hurt, as much as I never wanted to really feel that way again, what's more important about the experience was that I walked away from it basically having a sense that, I learned something from it. I think it took me a lot of years to even remotely feel good about to laugh about it because it was so embarrassing and it felt so terrible that I was supposed to be this great student and I was supposed to be effectively, this person who knew very well about how to do things and present myself. And, of course, at that point in my career, just being a senior or a junior in college, failing miserably in terms of being able to present myself in that respect. But it was still very, very, very helpful. I always remember there was a song by the old band Lard. And for you younger viewers out here, younger listeners that see this, Lard was a band that was formed between the members of Ministry, Al Jorgensen and Paul Barker. Ministry, obviously the brilliant industrial band, industrial metal, or whatever you want to call it, synthesizers and samples with guitars band, and effectively Jello Biafra, the lead singer of the Dead Kennedys, or at least, used to be the lead singer of the Dead Kennedys. And effectively it was them together. And it was gnarly. I mean, it was all the power and the strength, the composition, the production that Al Jorgensen had made famous, that incredible knack for making something in a dance music way, repetitious, somehow work for 5.5 minutes and never be boring. And it was that lessons from dance music bleeding over into hard rock and metal that is ostensibly what made Ministry so wonderful. But then, of course, with Jello Biafra's incendiary, biting wisdom and, commentary and political knowledge and all the crazy stuff that he's famous for and so good at. And effectively, there's it's not their best song because there are so many really great Lard songs, but there's a song called I Am Your Clock. And it's this very, very long song talking about the futility of life and the futility of culture. And, one of the things that Jello Biafra sarcastically, and I think Jello Biafra would describe himself as a form of, constructive satire, effectively he referred to, give up, don't try things, you might fail. And I always remember that line in the way that he put it, because, of course, in his super sarcastic tone, obviously his point was that if you never try things, if you never fail, you're never going to grow. You're never going to learn. And a lot of the time, that's when the most important things come. I think that there's a temptation. I mean, look, life's too stressful as it is, right? Things are about as difficult as anything has a reason to be. And we've all been through enough. Like, who the hell wants things to be more difficult after everything that we've gone through the last 3 years? But at the end of the day, sometimes that is as the old metaphor says, the old cliche, the sharpening of the blade, right? The ability to temper something, in fire and to basically have it be treated such that it can withstand the elements, to be able to be functional in spite of the things that happen. So the temptation might be in times where things are difficult or awkward like that to basically, run and hide or to, shy away from it. But ultimately, at least metaphorically, it doesn't mean, hey, go run off cliffs or, go do 130 miles per hour on the freeway or something like that. It doesn't mean do anything foolhardy to that extent. But generally speaking, it does mean allowing yourself a chance that maybe things didn't go so well. Maybe someone has a chance to give you some feedback. Maybe someone has a chance to tell you about something that didn't go well. And then that can be instructive as far as helping you grow and become something more. Maybe that becomes something as a part of your toolkit. Now you have knowledge and information or, automatic skills or, muscle memory, as a drummer might put it, to effectively help guide you when it comes to trying to do this again. And then that becomes a part of your overall quality. Yeah, it doesn't feel great to fail. It doesn't feel great to have mistakes. It doesn't feel great to have anything less than praise showered at you. I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone else. Love to hear it, love to have it. But at the same time, it is in these incredible, difficult moments where I personally just find that leaning into that and allowing for that, well, this might not go wrong. And I guess, without going to a whole other doorway of, psychology and philosophy, but on some level, there's also the fact that some things might fail in spite of you doing the best thing possible. You might do the best that you're capable of doing. And then the result that comes back might categorically be a failure, right? And I mean, ask any actor, ask any person who has to audition for things, ask them what it's like to basically give their all and the years and the time they spend honing their craft, and then to have somebody who they don't really know, doesn't really know them or their story, be like, no, you're not good enough. Doesn't mean they weren't good enough. It just means that that person didn't see what they were looking for in that moment. But that takes an immense courage. I have to, even though I've never really fancied myself an actor in any respect, I have to have deep appreciation for anyone who has the courage to put themselves out there like that, to face that kind of rejection and to be able to grow and learn from it and keep trying and keep trying. It's hard. So ostensibly, keep the faith, keep trying, keep fighting, keep learning. And effectively, that's going to be the thing that is going to be the most helpful for all of us in what is going to be, I'm sure, turbulent waters in the few years to come, or turbulent skies, maybe a better metaphor. So that's all for this week's episode of This Week is Live. Thank you so much again for joining us. We're going to be here each and every week, and I know I keep saying it, but I'm teasing it. There's going to be a lot more video content in terms of what we're doing. This is just the beginning here at Mixdown as far as things we're going to do. There's going to be a lot more things that are going to happen, and we're going to get to that soon enough, I promise. In the meantime, if you don't already, please subscribe to us here on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. If you engage with our content anywhere that you see it, where we post clips, either in YouTube Shorts or if it's on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or any of the social media platforms, we thank you so much for joining us. Please come back. We'll be here each week, roughly around 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. I know we were a bit late today. Life happened. Things are going on. Got on the air a little late, but generally speaking, around 5:30 Pacific time. So please join us again. We'll be back next week for more headlines and more stories. So glad to see you well.